Hey everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at Venus's entrance into the sign of Virgo. This is a important transit for Venus because not only is Venus entering a new sign, but Venus's dignity changes significantly when moving from Leo to Virgo. I mentioned this a little bit in yesterday's video where I talked about how that transition between Venus and the late degrees of Leo moving into Virgo showed up in an individual's chart who lost their brother, and how that dignity change from Leo to Virgo was involved. So you could watch yesterday's video, which was part 3 on looking for obvious things in birth charts. The main thing to pay attention to in this transit is the fact that Venus moves into its fall or depression. When we say that Venus has entered into its fall or depression, you can almost imagine Venus moving into like off from the mountaintop in its opposite sign, which is Pisces, where it's exalted, into kind of the valley, a shadowy valley in Virgo. And there's a passage in Rhetorius who was thought to be drawing on earlier source texts. He was a late Roman astrologer, or he was a late Roman author who wrote an astrology text and referred to people like Antiochus and others in that text. And there was a passage where he said, why is it that in the sign where Venus is exalted, that would be Pisces, there Mercury is depressed? Mercury has its fall or depression in Pisces. But where Mercury is exalted in the sign of Virgo, there Venus is depressed. And he goes on to say that we say it's because the intellectual and the sensual have a kind of inherent archetypal tension between one another. You guys have probably heard me talk about this before. So if you think about what the intellect does, the intellect gathers, sorts data, communicates, decodes. Mercury is going to be associated with things like marketplaces and exchange of money, goods, services, trade, even like the Olympics that are happening right now, games where there's a lot of back and forth, like checkers or chess or basketball courts where things go back and forth and the action's really fast and kind of there's an exchange back and forth. Those would all be related to Mercury as well. It's not that Mercury doesn't know pleasure. It's that the pleasure derived from a Venusian experience is very different from that of a mercurial experience. Say you go to a coffee shop. Let's say you have a really pleasurable conversation. You might actually be experiencing a mix of Mercury and Venus. So it's not like their qualities can't get along together, but probably in that coffee shop, you'd be having a more Mercury dominant experience compared to a Venus dominant experience if, let's say, the joy or happiness of the experience was derived on the quality of ideas, thoughts, concepts, words, communication, tingling nervous system with your coffee or your caffeine or whatever. The stimulation of lots of people around you, people typing on their keyboards, doing work. So that kind of stimulation, joy, the aesthetic of that space could be a little Venusian. The taste of the coffee might be Venusian. Wearing nice clothes to go see your friend could be Venusian. And even to a certain extent, experiencing just the pleasure of the space, the back and forth, the stimulus. So Mercury and Venus aren't, but my point is that Mercury and Venus aren't like enemies, but there is this tension inherent in them. For example, let's take a completely different kind of experience. Let's take an experience where, let's say I'm thinking back to like being 16 or 17. And let's say it's your first time like making out with your significant other, and the way that feels, the way that starts to transcend the mind, unless you're super nervous, I guess. But the more bodily, sensual dimension of pleasure and exchange, the harmonization of bodies and touch, for example, that would be a little bit more Venusian. Let's use another example. Let's say that you decide to go to an art museum. Now, here's where Venus and Mercury could come into play again, but so they're working together, but maybe it's a little bit more Venus heavy than the coffee shop. and let's say you're walking through a museum and you see all of these paintings on the wall, and it's very quiet. I've been to a number of museums. Most of the ones that I've been to, people are very respectful. They'll stand near one of the displays or exhibits or paintings or whatever the case might be, photography display or something. And they'll stand and they'll look at it and they'll just take it in. So it's like a very sensual experience. It's being absorbed in something very deeply. And there's a lot of beauty and aesthetic, and there's colors and there's artwork, right? Okay, so it's a very Venusian experience, an art museum. But you may also have very, people are, oh, look at this, I really like this. So they're having these, like, I'm just remembering, and when I lived in New York City, going to art museums with friends, and you'd have these kind of hushed conversations where you might talk a little bit about what you appreciated about the artwork, or, look at noticing something, or there might be an almost like a form of like analysis or commentary or dialogue that happens, but it's subdued in favor of the actual absorption into the sensual dimension of the art itself. If I can, people who are artists out there who work in or have had artwork in museums, your language would probably be much more sophisticated than mine. But the point is that, again, Venus and Mercury aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily enemies. They can work together, but notice the tension. Like, if you were in that kind of space and it was more or less accepted that you would let people absorb the beauty of these artworks, and you just were chatting, walking really quickly, like super stimulated, right? There would be something maybe that you would create a tension. So there's some natural kind of tension between the two. That's the point. Now, when Venus enters Virgo, that tension, for better or worse, because let's face it, for the ancient philosophers, that tension between archetypal opposites was creative in nature. It could, in Plato's philosophy, for example, in his Philebus, he talks about, and this draws on earlier Pythagorean philosophy, that the tension of these different kinds of opposites will yield in the duality between them, will yield some kind of third, like they'll birth something out that will be like a third entity that is somehow a unique composition of the two, of the dyad itself. For example, sex creates a baby, similar idea. So you have this potential for the creative tension between the sensual and the intellectual to be synthesized right now in our lives. And that could be a really good thing, genuinely good, but you will have to go through something of the tension first, or there may be a dimension of your experience psychically that has to just deal with that tension, So what I want to do right now is I want to run through Venus and Virgo through all 12 houses. So you can track this according to your rising sign using whole sign houses and get a few little words about each of the houses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Aries on the ascendant, and I'm going to walk through Venus's position. And let's just see. Here we go. Okay. So I'll just say a few things about each house and give you a few things to watch for. Now, this is based on your rising sign of your birth chart if you're using whole sign houses, which is what we use generally in Hellenistic astrology. So here we have Venus in Virgo. By the way, I just picked up an opposition to Jupiter. So got that nice kind of like inflation from Jupiter at the moment. They say be careful not to buy super expensive things when Venus goes opposite Jupiter. I was at Disney World for a wedding that was like a Cinderella themed wedding when Venus was opposite Jupiter one time, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was super over the top and really beautiful and fun and very magical, and also very overstimulated, and temptations at that place, that theme park to blow money all over the place. Half consumerist trap, half magic. And that is exactly, that's exactly how I felt. So at any rate, all right, so here we have the opposition between Venus and Jupiter, and that's passing already. So what we're going to do is just walk Venus through the 12 houses. So Venus, if you're an Aries rising, Venus is landing in your sixth house. Now, here we go. So Aries rising, right? You're going to see Venus in the sixth. So I'm just going to walk it through sign by sign. If you're an Aries rising, Venus in your sixth house, what could that pertain to? Well, first of all, sixth house was called the joy of Mars and is associated with conflict. And so it is very possible right now, because Venus also rules your seventh house of relationships, if you're an Aries rising, that there's a certain degree of conflict in relationships that you're working out. Maybe there's some healing work to do in relationships. Maybe they're in the workplace, maybe they're personal, maybe they're marital, whatever the case might be. Watch for also the tension between the intellectual and the sensual to be a little bit more important right now within relationships, and specifically, I would say, conflicts in relationships, or problem solving in relationships. That comes to mind. All right, if you're Taurus rising, we're going to take Venus into your fifth house. Now, the same kind of tension between the sensual and the intellectual could show up in relationship to your kids if you have children, or it could show up in terms of an attempt to get pregnant. It could show up in terms of your personal health, or it could show up in terms of something to do with your lifestyle or appearance, because this is your ascendant ruler. And when it's in the fifth, although it's a place of good fortune, Venus has fallen on hard times. Are you having to revise your lifestyle or your diet? Are you trying to, there's, I would say, like the tension for Tauruses right now might be having something to do with pleasure or happiness, and the stress or tension between the intellectual approach to feeling good or looking good, and perhaps a more sensual dimension to it, or a more organic dimension to it. So watch for that tension in the house that has to do with pleasure, happiness, joy, creativity, and children. All right, let's go forward to Gemini rising. If you're Gemini rising, then Venus in Virgo is in your fourth house. So watch for that sensual / intellectual tension to be present around the topics of home, family, living environment, maybe family karma, generally speaking, relationships in the home or family. This could also be marital, because Venus in the fourth will often point to marriage or spouses and things like that. It could have something to do with the decor or landscaping, or something around home or interior design. I like this as a place of starting over, or having to work your way out of some challenges around what the home space looks or feels like, and maybe some disagreements about it. But again, the great news about Venus being in its fall is that it works its way out of that position gradually, and it only has one place to go, which is up. Okay, so if you're a Cancer rising, then we're putting this in your third house. Now, that could mean that your neighborhood or your home or around your home is going through some kind of makeover. That is not at all uncommon when Venus goes into Virgo in the third. I've seen that more times than I can count over the years. Because the third represents the immediate environment, Venus in Virgo will mean, oh, I'm getting my yard landscaped, or there's a construction project in my neighborhood, or something like that that's a little bit difficult. It's like, it's going to make it look better, but for now it's a little chaotic. That's a Venus-Mercury tension. It could also mean something about siblings, or like people around your home or family going through some challenges or difficulties. We see that because Venus is the ruler of your fourth house. But I would also look for this in terms of a mindset that you're going through, or a change in mentality that you're going through around the marriage of those opposites between intellect and sensuality. So watch for that to be a big theme in your own mindset in the next 3 weeks ahead. All right, so let's go forward to Leo rising. Now we're putting Venus in the second house. That's the place of money and finances. So you can watch for tension between, well, I want to buy this because it looks good, or it's going to make me feel good. Oh, but is that an intelligent use of my finances? So there might be some stress or tension between looking at your resources, finances, money, assets, possessions. And Venus coming into the second in its fall can mean that there's a temporary some temporary bills that pop up, or some challenges or setbacks because of that dignity change. But it could also mean that you're spending money on something earthy and Venusian, or that you're spending a lot of time, with kind of an analytical and aesthetic quality combined, spending money or doing something like that. So that's also a real possibility. So, and I'm not sure I have a doctor's appointment today, and it keeps popping up on my screen reminding me that I have it. So I hope that's not showing up to you guys. Anyway, so Venus in the second house, though, generally will bring up tensions around the value differences that you have with others too, and how you spend or what you spend or how something looks or appears. So watch for that as well. All right, let's move this forward to put Venus in Virgo on the ascendant. Now, Venus in Virgo on the ascendant can mean that something about the way that you look or appear is changing. This can have something to do with health or bodily things. And I would look at this as this is an important time not to be very critical of yourself, because Venus in Virgo can be it can have an eye for perfection, analytical, technical perfection of beauty or appearance. But that can also mean that you are too judgmental of yourself or critical of yourself or judgmental of something or even of others. So I like this as a time of personal refinement on the level of body, on the level of appearance, on the level of health. But I'd be careful about being a little too hard on oneself, or be careful of the overly critical voice coming in. A balance between the mental and the sensual is needed for you in the most personal spaces of body and mind right now. If we push this forward again, then we have Venus in the 12th house if you're a Libra. So that's if you're a Libra, that means Venus is your ascendant ruler. Putting Venus in the 12th if you're a Libra might mean that you're looking at some shadows within your relationships. You might be looking at anxiety in relationships, or unhealthy attachments, or blind spots in relationships, sometimes with sisters or women, or something about sex and love. Because the 12th is often the place that will bring up our shadows, I would also steer clear of drama, gossip, manipulation, like anything that when Venus is in the 12th, you just want to be careful of things that become painful or hurtful because of a lack of discernment or wise judgment. And this will often have to do with pleasure or joy, or how we seek pleasure or joy, as well as how we handle our relationships. So something to watch for there if you're a Libra rising. If you're a Scorpio rising, Venus in Virgo falls in your 11th house, which is going to be the place of friends and allies and groups. So Venus in Virgo, the unfortunate thing is there can be conflicts of interest or value conflicts, or more stress or strain in groups or in communities that you belong to or attend or something like that. On the other hand, there can also be tension between what is the most beautiful thing to do, or what is the popular thing to do, and what is the intelligent thing to do, and can they come together harmoniously or not? That might be something that you're trying to work out with colleagues, or at work, or in like a religious setting or some kind of organization you belong to. So I would watch for that in particular. Could also be among friends, like some challenges within your social circles that represent somehow that Venus-Mercury dichotomy. Okay, so let's move this along to Sagittarius rising. If you're a Sag rising, we're taking this Venus and we're putting it in your 10th house. So the worst part of that would be, the kinds of stresses or tensions in the workplace, either within an organization you work for, in the management, or with your boss, or potentially with coworkers, or so any kind of stress or tension with higher ups, or with employees, or with coworkers. That can also be a big deal. Remember that your 11th house ruler of groups and friends is Venus in the 10th in her fall. Okay, so you can see some of those tensions potentially coming both in groups, colleagues, friends, and in the workplace. On the other hand, Venus in Virgo in the 10th can mean that there's some kind of earthy Venusian dimension of experience that's trying to assert itself or establish itself in the next 3 weeks in terms of what you're doing all the time, or what you're taking an active interest in, or maybe what you're doing in the workplace. So watch for that. The 10th house as a place of action will often just say, this is what I'm going to be doing all the time right now. Venus in Virgo could mean I'm going to be studying nutrition. I'm going to be every day I'm reading a really cool book about, diet and analyzing and breaking down, the way I, eat every day, or it could be something like that. So, Venus in Virgo could be just literally describing the kinds of actions or activities that you're involved in right now. Now, if we put Capricorn on the ascendant, then Venus in Virgo is going to go into the 9th house. Now, that can mean that there are going to be some really interesting conversations coming up around your guiding life principles, philosophies, and beliefs, probably right along the lines of the sensual and well, I would say probably there's going to be a degree of debate or critical and analytical dimension of the next 3 weeks, but in relationship to the sensual. For example, if you're looking at it politically, the Venus and Virgo interfall in the ninth could present the abortion debate in politics. Abortion, religion, political rights, women's bodies, women's rights. So you could have more heated or charged conversations, debates, rhetoric surrounding women, beliefs, ideology, politics. So you might notice that if you're a Capricorn rising. On the other hand, the question of sex and love and religion, should you be controlling your sexual energy, or how much should you be, or what does, what is the right amount of philosophical or spiritual beliefs that one should share with a partner, or not. These kinds of things may be really important for you in the next couple of weeks ahead if you're a Cap rising. So let's go ahead to Aquarius rising. If you're an Aquarius rising, then Venus is going to fall into the 8th house. Venus and her fall in the 8th house the worst of it can mean that there are, deaths. Like that would be like the worst case scenario, that someone or something dies. That could be metaphorical, doesn't have to be literal, like the death card in tarot, very similar. I always say that because people freak out when it comes to 8th house transits, but also like debts emotionally, financially, that you're going into or that other people are going into. This is potentially related to home and family topics for you if you're an Aquarius rising, because Venus also rules your 4th house. So you could maybe that there's a little family karma theme coming in as well. But Venus in the 8th in her fall could mean also that there's some kind of debt or obligation or soul contract with someone else that's tugging or pulling at you pretty intensely in the next couple of weeks. I would say of all of the placements, Aquarians might have the roughest go of it. So I'd be particularly interested to hear what ends up happening for you Aquarians out there. So feel free to leave some comments in the YouTube comment section. You can put #grabbed if you want to share a personal story that you don't mind me sharing in another video sometime down the road. Okay, so finally, if you're a Pisces rising, then that Venus and Virgo is entering your 7th place of relationships. That could be easily could bring challenges in intimate relationships or partnerships. It could also just bring up that tension between the analytical, the more nervous qualities of Mercury, the mind and communication qualities of Mercury, and the sensual dimension. For example, maybe you're with someone and you're really happy, but you're also finding it difficult to keep up with their neediness or their tendency to have low self-esteem or something like that. Or on the other hand, maybe, someone's entering your life and it's like they're beautiful to you, but they're in their head too much. That's like I get that all the time. People come in for readings of like, I really like this person, but they're so in their head all the time. And I just want to like drop into a more organic, playful space. They're not analyzing, dissecting everything. And so those tensions can be really pronounced with Venus and Virgo in general, but all the more so if you're a Pisces rising, because Venus is going through that 7th house of relationships right now. So watch for there to be a Venus and Virgo theme coming up in relationships. Now that could also, any of these placements that I've talked about today, by the way, could bring some kind of earthy synthesis of Venus with Mercury that, I'm not thinking of. So for that reason, I always love hearing your stories. I learn my little almanac or like encyclopedia grows tremendously by reading what you guys write. Put #grabbed if you don't mind me sharing some example of Venus and Virgo in your life or in the next 3 weeks in these houses. Always appreciate that. So that's what I've got for today. I hope you guys are doing well. We'll be back tomorrow for tomorrow we're going to be looking at the full moon that's coming through in Aquarius. Sun just changed signs into Leo. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow as well. All right, that's what I've got. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.